Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. I also would like to thank Seva for giving me the opportunity to share with you a few outcomes of my PhD research. My PhD thesis is entitled Conventions, Traditionalism, Latinization and Modernity in Armenian Typefaces Across Typemaking Technologies from 1512 to 1977. One of its findings was the connection between the Armenian typographic heritage and Armenian cultural identity. Today, I would like to illustrate this connection with an outstanding example, the contribution made by Johannes Muhentisyan to refining Armenian typefaces. His attempts at modernizing the Armenian typographic script took place in the context of rising European influence in the 19th century Constantinople. But first of all, just a quick glance at what the traditional Armenian traditional style, known as bolorgir, looks like. In printing, the bolorgir style was used to typeset main text. This is the Isus Vorti, a 12th century poem by Nerses Norali, printed at the Amsterdam printing office using the text bolorgir types cut for the occasion from 1658 to 1660 by the punch cutter and type founder Christopher van Dyck in Amsterdam. Traditionally, the bolorgir style is a left-to-right writing system. It's slanted. Most of its letters are 16.5 degrees slanted. It has sharp and angular lines and junctions, giving the script a regular, almost rigid appearance. It has uppercase and lowercase letters, ascenders and descenders, consonant and vowels, and punctuation symbols. Today, the Armenian script is used by 3 million in Armenia and 7 million Armenian speakers in the diaspora. So the yellow dots here highlight the main places of settlement. Now, imagine you're visiting Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, and this is what you would come across. Street signs such as the engraved plaque that records traditional lettering known as Yergatagir, which means Aaron's letters. And the picture below shows very ordinary sign writing that you would expect to come across in everyday life. Here the parallel between Armenian and Latin scripts shows how standardized and westernized the Armenian script can be. Another example, representative of a traditional Armenian style, was impressive hand-painted theater posters, which unfortunately have completely disappeared. However, in addition to those posters, we have shop signs that can tell us a lot about the current taste and use of Armenian script in the capital, particularly when seen next to the Latin alphabet. Armenian letters have some European influence. We can see serifs, recognized letters in the middle of Armenian words, and the style seems familiar to Western readers. Looking at the graphic scene, you can notice a strange contrast between tradition and modernity. But the search for modernity through the imitation of Western European tradition, culture, and alphabet is not specific to the 21st century. My PhD research has brought to light some significant historical precedents. The traditional bolorgir slanted style, like the one at the top, was predominant in the printing of text until the middle of the 19th century. In the 1840s, this traditional style was replaced by a new upright Armenian type style that has significant consequences for Armenian typography, the second one. This marked the first step in the adoption of Western influence in the Armenian script. Now, this is when Johannes Muhentisyan appears, a publisher, printer, a type founder, and punch cutter. Muhentisyan lived in Constantinople, where he endeavored to modernize Armenian typefaces. Muhentisyan has not been properly credited in the history of Armenian typefaces by printing historians, nor has his endeavor toward modernization been investigated in its historical and social context. My thesis has established that Mehentisian can be seen as a herald of Latinization in the context of Armenian typefaces. Latinization is the adaptation or acquisition of Latin design features such as proportions, excites, serifs by other scripts. This is an objective command, not intended to signify approval or disapproval. Mehentisian started his printing activity in 1839. His skill as a goldsmith enabled him to engage in the art of punch cutting and to establish his own type foundry. Mehentisian did not restrict his activity to devising types and to printing publications, but he also contributed to the development of Armenian typography by writing his theory and principle on Armenian types. A noteworthy 16-page pamphlet in Armenian language entitled Announcement for the Sake of the Newly Formed Letters was published in 1847 in Constantinople by Mehentisian. This is the first printed account entirely in Armenian, reflecting upon the forms of the printed characters of the Bolorgi style. Mehentisian saw the need to revise the printed forms of the lowercase letters of the Bolorgi style. According to him, there were two main deficiencies in the lowercase letter of the Armenian Bolorgi types. The first one was the fragility of some of the characters. Here, Mehentisian refers to those letters that have a long horizontal stroke attached to the descender, such as those here in the example, and therefore can break easily. The issue can be understood when looking at the cast type. For example, this letter is kerned on the right in order to obtain even letter spacing during composition. This means that by extending outside the block of type, the kern, so its tail, can be easily damaged. The breaks of some Armenian sort affected the quality of publications, since there would be missing elements in the text. Also, the printer needed to bear the cost of casting new characters to replace the broken one. The second deficiency was caused by alternate characters that needed to be nested in the tail letters. Alternate characters were cut at a smaller size. The many alternate characters increased the character set, and consequently the punch cutter and the type founder had to carry out a considerable amount of work. It influenced the composer's pace of work and complicated the composing process. According to Mehentisian, his Bolorgi letters differ from those of a traditional Bolorgi type in abandoning the slant and in folding the tail upwards. There are also other differences. A noticeable one is the serifs attached to the vertical stems. Modernization of Armenian script did not happen in isolation. It might be seen in the context of the opening of a getaway for Western influence in the Ottoman Empire in the wake of the Reorganization Edict of 1839, which encouraged Constantinople to become one of the Ottoman cities to manifest modernization and Eurocentric mindsets. Also, the facade of the city began to be reorganized based on Western urban design, aiming to build according to the standards of European capitals, such as Paris or Vienna. You can see a later example of building that began to appear at the turn of the 20th century in Istanbul. This is the earliest relevant example of Art Nouveau that can be found in the capital. Whether the contemporary facade given to Constantinople was meant to symbolize the renewal of the Ottoman Empire, the new European facade given to the Armenian script stood for the modernization of Armenian identity. If we look at Europe in the 19th century, we can find individuals from various Armenian diasporic communities connecting between each other and discussing modernizing Armenian typefaces. For example, before publishing his announcement in 1847, Mehentisian had made connection with individuals from the Mekhitarist congregation in Vienna and in Venice. The Mekhitarist fathers were the first Armenian body of scholars who in the 18th and 19th centuries shared most of ideas on Armenian history, language, and literature. They also had a reputation as publishers. Theirs can be considered the first printing establishment in Europe run by Armenians to operate successfully for a long period of time. Until the 19th century, the Mekhitarists used very traditional Bologir type, which was considered by printers and publishers to be the model against which to compare other Armenian typefaces. However, by the 1830s, we begin to find calligraphic experiments showing a more Western appearance. In his pamphlet, Muhandisyan informs readers that the priest Peter Minasyan from a Mekhitarist congregation in Venice, the author of this calligraphy book, visited his printing establishment in Constantinople, advised and encouraged him to proceed revising the shapes of Armenian letters in Bologir style. Also, the Mekhitarists in Vienna had given their support. This is demonstrated by similarities between Muhandisyan's type and some calligraphy work done by one of the Viennese fathers, which appeared in 1838, so 9 years before Muhandisyan published his pamphlet. An interesting moment in history of Armenian typefaces is marked by the publication of a bilingual journal that appeared in 1855 in Paris, La Colombe du Massif. In the foreword of the first issue, its Armenian printer and publisher, Janik Karamian, announced the introduction of new Armenian typefaces, shedding some light on the reason behind his typographic modernization and inviting readers to receive the new forms. It was most unusual for editors to use the foreword of the first issue of their journals to talk about typefaces used by their publishers. This demonstrates the importance of the new typefaces used in La Colombe du Massif, which you can see in this image. It is likely that Janik Karamian read Muhandisyan's announcement and decided to endeavor to improve the forms of the Bologir style. In the issue La Colombe du Massif, dated in October 1856, Karamian acknowledges Muhandisyan as the first who aimed to rectify the Bologir style, and the first to produce Latinized Armenian types and use them for printing. Among those Armenians that supported the modernization of their script, there were also those that reacted negatively. A noteworthy example I came across during my PhD research is a letter written by an influential individual in Java, today Jakarta, and published in 1861 on the Parisian journal Paris. It was the typeface used in this journal that triggered this negative reaction. In the letter, the editor of Paris was rebuked for supporting the new Armenian upright style. The author of the letter expressed his concern for the Armenian script, language, and identity. He deemed the introduction of new Armenian typefaces imitating European typographic styles to be an issue of national importance. The letter certainly affected the editor. Not only did he publish it in Paris, but he also changed publisher and restored the classical Bologir style in all subsequent issues. Since the second half of the 19th century, Armenians constantly look west, but this has gone hand in hand with strong nationalism, reflecting in Armenian eagerness to preserve its script, not simply its language. The need to foster a strong sense of identity is compounded by the existence of a vast worldwide diaspora. Latinized Armenian typefaces have been widely accepted, but the traditional Bologir style has never been replaced. So how relevant is all this to us in the 21st century? Looking at contemporary publications in Yerevan, such as this newspaper page, the extensive use of Latinized typefaces is evident. It seems that Latinization has been seen as synonymous of modernity, but this is open to debate. However, a look at this page from a magazine gives a different impression. The typeface used here was designed in 2010 by an Armenian living in Lebanon, Kajak Apelian. Publications typeset in traditional typefaces are a rare example in Yerevan, but I think that this magazine still shows that there is some space for a more traditional approach. Contemporary publications in Yerevan strongly contrast with a trend observed amid Armenian diaspora who favor a more traditional Bolurgi style, as evidenced in this striking example from an Armenian newspaper published in Paris in 2008. At the time, the newspaper was still printing in monotype Armenian hot metal types, which seems to reinforce a sense of attachment to the past. I have brought a copy of this newspaper with me here. Before reaching my conclusion, I would like to illustrate the trend to return to tradition as discerned from typefaces recently designed by non-native Armenian speakers and Armenian type designers in diaspora. Within this trend, while the opera style seems to be widely accepted by readers, some features belonging to the Bolurgi style have been progressively reintroduced. This can be seen when comparing a highly Latinized typeface designed in the 90s with two more recent fonts. The first of which is the Armenian typeface designed for the Noto project in 2014. I want to conclude my presentation by observing that Armenian type design is in constant state of flux. One can identify three questions for reflection. First, has the opera style introduced in the 19th century enriched the Armenian typographic repertoire, or has it weakened Armenian identity? Secondly, can the fact that the use of Islamic style diminished be considered a positive evolution? And finally, as we no longer depend on constraints imposed by metal type, would the reintroduction of traditional features help in privilegeability and authenticity? Thank you.